Okay, so what I've done here is I've pulled up the complex iteration project template. This is what we were working on in class today. Across the bottom, I didn't mention this in class, but there's actually multiple tabs you can have in a spreadsheet. So as I'm clicking down or showing down here, task 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, and part 4. These are 4 separate spreadsheets within a workbook. So since we're working on task 3.1, I'm going to click onto that task, and we see roughly what was kind of where I left off in class today. What I'm going to do actually is I'm just going to go ahead and highlight everything and hit delete. So to start over, to show what it is I wanted to show, to demonstrate how to program task 3.1 from the beginning. So if you recall, what I was trying to do in class was take the number 8 and iterate it by multiplying it successively by 0.5. This is what we did in part 1 on the piece of paper. And so the goal here is really just to program the spreadsheet to do the same thing. So what we showed in class, remember, spreadsheets are laid out where they give letters across the top columns, numbers across the rows. So like if I'm highlighted here, I'm in cell, I'm going to call that cell A3. Here I'm in cell B3, cell C3, etc. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in the first column, A3, and I'm just going to type the number 8 because that's what I want to start with. And then I want to create within this column multiplying successively by a half, basically iterate on that 0.8. The way I'm going to do that is I'm going to click into cell A4, and then I'm going to use the equal sign. Anytime you want to create a formula within a spreadsheet, you need to click the equal sign. And what I'm going to do for this formula is rather than just type the number 8 times 0.5, I could do that, but that doesn't really take into account the power of the spreadsheet. What I really want to do is type in the cell reference that includes the number 8 above. So I'm just going to type in A3, and Excel knows that what I mean by that is take the value, that's like a variable name. A3 is a variable name, and it's going to take the value that's in there, which is 8. I'm going to multiply. For multiplication, use the asterisk, and I'm going to put 0.5. And so it's going to basically compute the result of the formula. Take A3, which is the value in the cell above it, times 0.5, hit enter, and we get a 4. Now the reason we use a spreadsheet for something like this is if we want to iterate and do this lots of times, rather than punch it in a calculator and keep hitting enter, we can use the power of this repeated formula. So the way I'm going to do that is cell A5, what I want to do is I could do the same thing, equals A4. Now this is I'm taking the value in the cell A4 right above, times 0.5. I hit equal, I'll get 2 because it's taking the value of 4 multiplying by 2. Now it would be tedious to sit there and type in each cell with a new formula, so what we can do is actually just copy down. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to highlight the cell I want to copy, and see how there's this little square green dot at the bottom, and when I hover over it I get a plus sign. If I just click that and then slide down, it's going to just copy what's ever in that cell into the area that gets highlighted. I'm going to go ahead and do that, and you can see that it's copied down and there's some numbers that get created. So let's take a look at one of the formulas. If I click into A10, up here I can see the formula. It says equals A9 times 0.5. Whenever you copy formulas in Excel, it's aware that it assumes that you mean you want to keep the relative position of cells. So the way I would interpret, if I come back up to A4, and this formula in that cell is A3 times 0.5. So Excel is going to interpret that to mean take the cell above me and multiply by 0.5. So if I copy that down to here like we did in cell A14, well, the cell above me now is A13, and that's why in cell A14 we see A13 times 0.5 as the value. Now the reason to use spreadsheets is, so here we have this little sequence starting from 8 going down to effectively 0 as we keep multiplying by 0.5. Well, what's nice about a spreadsheet is I can come up to A3 and change my seed value. If I just type in 10 and hit enter, it'll redo all these calculations because of these formulas are still identical. So it's just saying take the value above me, multiply by 0.5. If I put in 32, it'll readjust. If I put in negative 32, now my seed value is negative. What's going to happen? I'm going to get that negative value multiplied by 0.5, and it's going to shrink down to 0. So that's, again, what you're seeing. One reason to use a spreadsheet is to put these, we call it parameterizing, so that you can quickly change a lot of calculations by just retyping one number. So in class, I'm going to put this back to 8. In class, we talked about what if I wanted to multiply by a number that's not 0.5. Let's say I wanted to multiply it by 0.25. One way to do that would be just to come in and change the formula. So if I'm going to change, I come in, the seed value is going to stay at 8, so the formula I'm going to change is 1 below it. This says I want to take the cell above me, multiply by 0.25, so I'm just going to change that number to 0.25, and not surprisingly, the 8 times 0.25 is 2. But look at cell A5. It's still doing half of the cell above me because we didn't copy down the new formula. So the way to do that would be to come back on, highlight the cell of the formula I want to copy, hover again in that bottom right corner over the little square dot, click, hold your mouse button down, and then just create a range that you want to copy to, and then it's going to copy that formula down to the range. And so if we validate that it works, say at A15, A14 times 0.25. So it's taking the cell above and multiplying by 0.25. But let's say we wanted to do this for a lot of different values of the multiplier 0.25. It would be kind of a pain to have to go in there and change the formula and copy it down every time. So we can actually put this number into a cell. And let's see, I'm going to just label some things here. So 8, we're going to call that value the seed. So that's a value we're going to change. And then I'm going to call the other value the multiplier. These arrows with the words, it's just really text to help remind me what's in there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put the number 0.25 here. So I want to be able to change my multiplier by just changing the value in C3. So now I need to come over and modify my formula, because right now the formula is just hard-coded to use the number 0.25. So instead, I'm going to use the cell reference, because C3 contains the value that I want to use. So now my cell A4 is going to be the cell above me times the value in cell C3, which is the multiplier. Now let's see what happens when I copy this down. I copy this down, and ooh, looks like I got a bunch of zeros. The first one worked, but then these other ones don't seem to be providing the answer that I was expecting. So let's look at what happened. On cell A5, what this is saying is the value in this cell is going to be A4, the cell above me, times the value in C4, which is the cell above me and 2 to the right. Well, that's what happens when you copy formulas down. It keeps the relative position. So when we created this formula, 0.25 was 1 up and 2 over. And so when we copy the formula, it's looking for a value 1 up and 2 over. The way we address that in Excel is through fixing called fixed cell references. So cell references are always relative unless you change them to be fixed. The way we change them to be fixed is we put this is going to seem a little unintuitive, but you put a $sign on the left side of the letter and a $sign on the right side of the letter. And when you do that, it indicates that you want C3 to be a fixed cell and not change when it gets copied down. So for here, this number is going to stay the same, but let's see what happens now when I go ahead and copy this formula down. Now my numbers look as I expect them, and let's look what happened to the formula. So in cell A5, it's saying take the number above me, which is good, times C3. Notice how that didn't move. So when I copied the formula down, it's now a fixed cell reference because I put these two dollar signs around it to fix the cell reference. So now we're in business. Just to kind of make it clear what I'm doing here, I'm actually going to just give a fill color to my seed of 8 and a fill color of, say, pink here. So what I'm doing by making these cells colored is making it abundantly obvious that I intend these to be input by the user, and these other ones are just formulas that are going to work. So now if I want to create a new orbit, if you will, all I have to do is change these two values and it'll do all the work for me. So let's say we want to start with a seed of 100 and we want to multiply by 0.6. I type those two values in, and because the formulas are structured the way they are, we go ahead and get the entire orbit without having to do any real work other than type these numbers in. If I type 50 in as the seed and I multiply it by 1, so if I repeatedly multiply 50 by 1, I should just get a series of 50s, and that's what I get. If I put a multiplier of 0 in here, I should just get zeros, right? I take 50 and multiply it repeatedly by 0. 50 times 0 times 0 times 0, etc. If I put 2 in here as the seed and I double it, I'm going to get a series of numbers that keeps doubling up: 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, etc. So really, this is the first half of task 1. I just wanted you to create a spreadsheet that was able to create a seed value, an iterate. So seed value is 2. Our iteration rule is multiply by this constant number, and then the orbit is this sequence of numbers that are created here. And we can see what the fate's going to be by just kind of seeing where the numbers tend to. It certainly looks like this one in particular is going to go off to infinity. The second half of task 2 then was to create a version of the spreadsheet where we do an additive rule. So I'm going to create another input cell, and instead of a multiplication rule, we're going to treat this as an add rule. So for example, I'm going to put the number 3 here, and we're going to say let's use this as an add rule. But I want to go ahead and use the same seed. So what I'm going to do is, and actually to do this, I'm going to create a new column in the spreadsheet. I'm going to insert a column. The way I can do that is because I want to put another row right next to it. Sorry, another column right next to the original column. This first one's going to be the multiplication column. In fact, I'm going to put a mult above it just so I know that it's a multiplication column. If I put my cell on, or my pointer on the B column, and I right click, there's an insert column option, and it's going to insert a new column there. And I want to use the same seed, so instead of retyping in 2, I'm going to just use the equal sign and say we'll use the same seed from A3. So this is going to be the add, I call it the add orbit. I'm not going to change it right now. And I'm going to change this to not be filled because it's not something I'm inputting, so I'm just changing the color back to green. So again, my only things I'm going to change as inputs here are the things that are colored. And so now what I want to do is for an adding rule, I want to take the cell above me, which in this case will be B3, and instead of multiplying by the value, I want to add a value. So I'm going to say plus, and then I'm going to come over and click, or I can either type F3 or I can click on F3 and it'll show up in the formula, and then I hit enter. And so now you can always see the formula up here in this little function box at f of x. That's why it's called f of x, because it's a formula box, a function box. And we can see here that this just took the number 2 and added 3 to it. Now again, if I copy it down the way it is right now, which I will do, it's not going to work because I didn't change the cell reference. If I go to B10 here, it says B9 plus F9, and it kept the relative position. So to fix that, I need to come up to B4, which is the original formula, put these dollar signs around the F because that's the fixed cell reference. I don't want that to move as I copy it down. Hit enter, and then I'm just going to drag down to copy, and now I have a new orbit, which is the add by 3 orbit. So I'm starting with the same seed, and you can see here if I change this to 4, it's going to add 4 every time. If I change this to 1, it's going to add 1 every time. If I change this to -1, it'll subtract 1 every time. Change it to 0, it should just stay constant. So now we have the flexibility to create 2 separate orbits based on 2 different iteration rules, and we've accomplished it through using a spreadsheet. So what I'd like you to do is go ahead and follow along with this, create your own spreadsheet that does the same thing, and then when you're done with it, you save it, and then you'll share it with me through the share button, which you can't see on the screen that I have right here, but it's in this green area up here off to the right and share it with my